Just a few reminders. This live feed is being recorded. Advice given on this radio show is for informational purposes only and is not intended to replace professional psychological or medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Questions and concerns about your mental health should be discussed with a qualified professional. Any use of this information is the sole responsibility of the listener. If you're having thoughts of harming yourself or someone else, call 988 or go to the nearest emergency room. So, I'm going to talk today about embracing your inner child. So, first of all, what does that mean? It means that connecting with the feelings from your childhood and giving them a platform in which to resolve themselves. First of all, it's important to remember that your feelings don't go away if you bottle them up or ignore them. I once heard a really good mantra that was, when you bury your feelings, you bury them alive. So most of us have some feelings, some negative feelings from our past, from our upbringing, such as hurt, disappointment, shame, frustration, abandonment, etc. And I've had people come to my office who have experienced trauma, and they'll say to me, I have kept this at bay all these years, and I've been fine. Why now? And I tell them it's because you can only keep it down for so long. Whether you acknowledge it or not, whether you are even conscious of it or not, those feelings are affecting your behavior. And when you don't identify those feelings and learn how to resolve them, then what you're going to do is you're going to react to them. And that's when we make bad decisions. That's when we act in ways that are seem irrational or angry or hurtful. When those feelings don't get resolved, they still influence your behavior. So instead, it's important to identify what those feelings are from your childhood. And by identifying them, you can be what I call the parent to your inner child. And by doing so, you are giving yourself what you never got from the caregivers in your life. What it means to be the parent to your inner child is, if you think about it literally, it's like sitting down with that child in your past and listening to the feelings that you have from the past and being able to say to that inner child, essentially to yourself, you didn't deserve to be treated that way. It isn't fair what happened to you. You deserved support, and then looking specifically at how some of those feelings have affected your life in the present moment, so that you can learn to be deliberate, be proactive, and not let those feelings affect how you react to triggers that occur in the present. So a lot to unpack here. Find is that most people will still try to get, if their parents are living, or maybe a parental figure, they'll still try to get what they didn't get from their childhood. So they're still looking for validation that who they are as a person and their feelings are okay, that they're worthy, um, and deserving of love, and also looking for what we call mirroring, that is a sense of self. And the role of a parent is to be a mirror for their child, to give their child a sense of who they are, and their self-worth and their competence. The problem is, if you grow up in a dysfunctional family, you didn't get positive mirroring. You got negative mirroring, or maybe um, inconsistent mirroring. And so what happens is that you grow up with a either negative sense of self or a confused sense of self about who you are, again, what your strengths are, what you bring to the world, what your worth is. And so what most people end up doing is they end up using other people as mirrors. So they're still trying to get that sense of self. They're still trying to get that fulfilled. And the reality is that nobody can do that for you. You, at this point as an adult, you have the capacity to find your own self-worth and to define your sense of self. When I do intakes, it's surprising to me how many people, when I ask them, so list some of your strengths, how much they struggle with that. I'm sure there are people in their lives that could name what some of their strengths are, but they don't have a sense of them. So there's those two things that I often find that adults are still looking for from their parents. Because the alternative is to acknowledge what you didn't get from your parents and to rely on yourself for a sense of self. And that means grieving your childhood, and it means facing the anxiety that you have about your own inadequacies. Most people, in fact, have feelings of inadequacy. That is, they don't feel like they're good enough, or there's something inherently wrong with them, or they're not worthy. When you're the parent to your inner child, you're doing two things. You are grieving what you didn't get from your childhood and what you were put through, and you are learning how to find your own sense of self and self-worth. Let's take hurt, for example. Um, if you've been hurt by a parent, chances are that hurt, unless you've processed it, is still there. And so what you would want to do is you would want to give that inner child a chance to express that hurt. And how does an inner child do that? They do it by allowing yourself to feel the hurt. So even though that's uncomfortable, it's important, because otherwise, if you don't, you're basically telling that inner child, that is, those feelings, that the same thing, or treating those feelings the same way that your parents treated them, that being dismissive or minimizing them or ignoring them or punishing for having them, right? So if you don't get in touch with those feelings, if you don't acknowledge them and support them, then you're repeating exactly what your parents did to you. And so the analogy that I like to use is, if you do have children, Imagine one of your children coming up to you and saying, "I'm upset." Are you going to say to them, "Well, I don't want to deal with that. That's just going to make me uncomfortable. So go away. I don't want to deal with that." Right? No, of course not. You would sit down with that child and say, "Well, what's going on? What's upsetting you? Let's talk about it, and let's look at what we can do." So your feelings from your childhood are exactly the same. If you dismiss them, ignore them, then they don't go away, right? They're still there, and then they're compounded by the fact that you're not acknowledging them, just like a child would feel if their feelings were dismissed. So now, the best way to process those feelings, particularly if you have experienced trauma, is through therapy. I don't, there's no other way, there's no other process out there like therapy, there's no other person like a professional trained therapist that can guide you through those feelings and help you to resolve them. So, so you're sitting down with your inner child, and the process is about allowing yourself to get in touch with those feelings, whatever the feelings were, the feelings of emptiness or hurt or anger or disappointment or abandonment, whatever those feelings were. You're going to let them come to the surface, and you're going to allow yourself to feel those feelings, right? And that way, you are giving those feelings an opportunity to do something that they never got growing up. Then you have the opportunity to validate those feelings. So you didn't deserve to be treated that way. You have a right to feel the way that you feel, because the feeling is still there and it's impacting your life in the present moment, your relationships with other people, right? And how you react under stressful situations. So once you allow those feelings to come to the surface, it's important to recognize that those are feelings from your past. They are not the present. And so basically, what you're doing is you, the adult, are being a vessel for those feelings. Instead of looking at it like, this is how I feel about myself today, or this is how I feel about life today, or, allowing those feelings to impact how you feel about the world around you, your life. You're going to say, okay, I recognize that these feelings are from my past, and I am allowing them to come to the surface. And I am being mindful of these feelings. I'm not trying to push them away. I'm not trying to analyze them. I'm simply allowing them to be. And looking at them almost like through a fishbowl, right? Just being compassionately curious, allowing those feelings to come to the surface. And then once they do, you can start looking at how those feelings are impacting your life in the present moment, because they are, right? Whatever the feeling is, abandonment, hurt, disappointment, anger, right? They are impacting your behavior and the way you are reacting in your relationships or the stressors in your life. So we can validate for that inner child what he or she didn't deserve, and then look at how those feelings are impacting your life in the present moment. And that's why it's important to do it. People will say, well, that's in the past. There's nothing I can do about it now. There's nothing I can change about it now. And that's true. There's nothing, you can't go back and change the past. But how you cope with it, those feelings, or how you cope with the past is going to determine how that past impacts you in the present moment. Again, those feelings don't just go away. And so the more proactive you are in labeling the feelings and identifying what specifically, where those feelings are coming from, and then looking at how they're impacting your life in the present moment, then you can start problem solving and looking at what's in your control and start to recognize triggers in your life that will bring up those feelings. So, what are triggers? Triggers are events or people that remind us of feelings from our past. So I have an analogy. If you take a pitcher and you fill it with soda and then coffee and then orange juice, when you go to pour out the soda, what's going to happen? The coffee and the orange juice are going to come with it. And that's what happens with feelings. So if something happens in the present that triggers that same feeling, hurt, disappointment, anger, then what's going to happen is whatever hurt or disappointment, anger, etc., that you have from the past that's unresolved, it's going to come up with it. And that's why there are times when we react that seem like we're overreacting. And someone will say to us, you're overreacting or you're being too sensitive. What's really happening is, and it's important to understand this so you're not judgmental of yourself or self-critical, to understand that this is part of being human, and this is what happens when you experience a dysfunctional upbringing, and you're impacted by it, and that is normal. It's a normal reaction for human beings. So when you find yourself reacting in a way that seems like excessive for the situation, then chances are what's happened is you're being triggered. And that's okay, because everybody has triggers. The important thing is to be aware of them. So you can say, you know what, I'm aware that I'm being triggered right now. And so some of the anger that I'm showing you is really anger from the past that's coming up, bubbling up with it. And so it's not that I'm not angry, but the intensity of the emotion is in part because that same emotion from the past is coming up. Now, if you're in a relationship with somebody who's triggered, then again, you have to understand that as human beings, we all have triggers. And so I always say, love me, love my triggers. So if somebody's triggered, you know, the response is not, well, I'm not your mother, so why are you reacting to me that way? Right. But to help that person to understand where that's coming from, to make that connection, and to help that person to process that emotion, um, because once you get it out of your system, right, it stops having the same power over you that it had before, that it has now, or that it had when you were growing up, or that your parents had over you, because you are now taking control of those emotions. And so I always find it ironic when people say that going to therapy is a weakness, because in reality, most people go through life just reacting to feelings that they're not even conscious of. And what therapy does is it helps you to be aware of your emotions, to label them, and to identify where they're coming from so that you can take control of them. You can be in control of your emotions instead of your emotions controlling you. It helps you to explain to that person so that they're not hurt or uh, angered, or by your reaction, because that's how arguments occur. With therapy, though, not only can you learn to be aware of your triggers, but you also learn ways of coping with your emotions that are constructive instead of destructive or self-defeating, because that's, again, what most people do is become very argumentative, and or they may get depressed, or they may feel very anxious. And so if you go to counseling, you can be more deliberate and say, how do I want to cope with this emotion? How do I want to cope with this anger, or this hurt, or this disappointment, or these feelings of abandonment? What's in my control now, so that I don't engaging in self-destructive behavior, or behavior that is destructive to your relationships, or is creates depression and anxiety. Right? So, you want to be able to say, I'm aware that I'm hurt from my past, um, but I don't want to, but I don't want to let that interfere with me getting close to people, right? And so by identifying that feeling and recognizing how it might be influencing your behavior, you can say, I want to acknowledge the hurt, but I also want to make sure that I don't let it interfere with me um, getting to know people, or getting closer to people, or having a loving relationship. And then you can problem solve. How do you do that? I mean, there are ways of honoring the hurt, not ignoring it, not pushing yourself into uncomfortable situations, um, but doing so, but not also following the hurt and then ignoring the your other needs, need for connection. And so that's just an example of how you can take a feeling from the past, and once you label it, um, and recognize how it's impacting you in the present, you can be proactive in coping with it, so that you um, find ways of dealing with it that are balanced. So, I want to wish everybody a happy weekend, and remember to subscribe so that you will be notified of the next Q&A live on Fridays at noon. To subscribe, I'm sorry, to also like this video, and to add your comments, and please feel free to post a question that you would like me to answer on next Friday. So see you soon. Take care.